My husband had 2 kids with our adopted daughter, so I moved the school principal into his house. Every time I walk into the grocery store, the whispers start before the automatic doors even close behind me. I can feel the eyes boring into the back of my neck, the checkout girls leaning in closer to each other, their voices dropping to a sharp, jagged hiss. "That's her," they whisper. "That's the wife whose husband left her for their own daughter." It doesn't matter that she wasn't my biological child. It doesn't matter that I spent years of my life trying to heal the trauma she brought into our home. In a town this small, the nuance of adoption is lost in the scandal. To them, I am just a tragedy, a woman who invited a viper into her nest and watched as it swallowed her marriage whole. Zoe came to us when she was 16. We already had 3 biological children and another adopted son, but my husband, Mark, and I felt like we had more to give. We wanted to be the safety net for a child the system had forgotten. She was quiet, guarded, and had eyes that seemed to look right through you. I spent hundreds of hours in therapy sessions with her, held her while she cried over her past, and treated her exactly like my own flesh and blood. When she turned 19, we decided as a family to buy her a small apartment nearby. We wanted her to have a head start, a sense of independence she had never known. We thought we were being good parents. We didn't realize we were just providing a sanctuary for the affair that was already beginning to rot our family from the inside out. The discovery didn't happen like it does in the movies. There were no hidden letters or accidental texts. It was the silence. The way Mark would disappear for hours to help her with her sink or check her taxes. When she turned 22, the air in our house became so thick with tension I could barely breathe. I finally sat them both down, expecting a denial, expecting them to tell me I was crazy. Instead, Mark just looked at me with a cold, detached expression I had never seen before and said, "Sarah, there's no point in lying. Zoe is pregnant. We're going to be together." I remember looking at Zoe, the girl I had tucked into bed, the girl whose graduation I had cried at, and seeing absolutely no remorse. She just rubbed her stomach and looked at the floor. My world didn't just break, it vanished. The years that followed were a blur of humiliation. Mark moved in with her, and they didn't just hide away, they lived their lives as if what they were doing was perfectly normal. A few years later, she had a second child. My biological children were devastated. They watched their father, the man who was supposed to be their moral compass, start a second family with their own sister. They stopped calling him. They began to hate the sound of his name. But in a small town, you can't escape your own shadow. In school, my children were bullied relentlessly. The other kids were cruel, calling them uncles to their father's mistake and making jokes that no child should ever have to hear. It reached a breaking point where I was being called into the school office twice a week to deal with fights and tearful breakdowns. That was how I met David. He was the principal of the high school, a man with kind eyes and a voice that sounded like a calm harbor in a storm. The first time he called me into his office to discuss my youngest son's behavior, I expected another lecture, another pitying look. But when I sat down across from him, he didn't look at me like the town's favorite scandal. He looked at me like a woman who was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. "I know what you're going through, Sarah," David said softly. "And I want you to know that this school, and I, are on your side." It was love at first sight, though I was too broken to realize it then. It started with coffee to talk about the kids, then dinner to talk about our lives, and soon, David became the steady hand that guided me back to myself. He didn't just love me, he accepted my children, and he stood up for them when the town wouldn't. Eventually, David moved in. The house that had once felt like a tomb of broken memories began to feel like a home again. We laughed at the dinner table. We watched movies. We were a family. But Mark, who had been perfectly happy playing house with Zoe, couldn't handle the idea of me moving on. He began showing up at the front door unannounced, usually late at night, smelling of resentment. He would pound on the wood, shouting that the house was still half his, that he had a right to be there, that he didn't want some stranger raising his biological kids. One night, David opened the door and stood his ground, a wall of calm authority against Mark's frantic rage. Mark looked past him at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, ugly jealousy. "You're really going to let him sit in my chair, Sarah?" Mark hissed, his voice cracking. "After everything we were?" I stood there, holding David's hand, and I realized something that changed everything. I wasn't just happy to be with David, I was happy that Mark was watching. I wanted him to see the life he had thrown away. I wanted him to see that while he was stuck in a cramped apartment with a girl half his age and two screaming toddlers, I was being loved by a man who actually respected me. I felt a surge of cold, delicious spite. For years, I had been the victim, the one everyone pointed at. But seeing Mark's face contort with envy as he looked at my new life, that was the best medicine I'd ever had. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "You gave up your right to this house the moment you walked into hers. Now get off my porch before I have the principal report you for trespassing." Mark tried to sue for the house, he tried to turn the kids against David, but it backfired. Every time he made a scene, he only proved why I had been right to let him go. The town's whispers haven't completely stopped, but they've changed. Now, they don't just talk about the wife who was left, they talk about the woman who stood up and found something better. I see Zoe sometimes at the park with the kids, my husband's children, my grandchildren, I don't even know what to call them, and she looks tired. She looks like a girl who realized too late that the man who would cheat with you is the man who will eventually cheat on you. I don't hate her anymore. I don't have enough energy for that. I'm too busy living the life that Mark thought I would never have without him. I'm sitting on my porch now, David is cooking dinner inside, and for the first time in a decade, I'm not waiting for the other shoe to drop. Eve already walked through the fire, and I'm the only one who came out clean.